Saideepa is a lecturer in agricultural systems at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture at UTAS. Prior to joining UTAS, Deepa worked at Charles Sturt Uni in New South Wales. For her PhD, she adapted a systems approach to explore the challenges of integrating ecological knowledge and social criteria for managing environmental water in the Murray-Darling Basin. Deepa's also worked at the International Water Management Institute in India, and prior to the shift into water and agriculture, Deepa worked as a project manager, systems analyst and programmer in Australia and the US. And Deepa is also one of our AWA committee members here in Tas. So she'll be presenting the Collaborative Water Management Tasmanian Pilot.
Thank you all. I've always wondered whether I'd give a TED talk in my life. And I didn't think I would, but today here I am going to give a TED talk because I've got Ted's notes. I have seen him present this before and I've worked very closely with him, but I must admit this talk was meant to be a TED talk. So please bear with me if I have to refer to his notes a little bit. Okay, broadly, I'm going to touch upon things that others have already spoken about: climate, the future, demand for water, and then tell you about some projects that we're doing at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture, which is part of the University of Tasmania. Okay, so climate is a central challenge for meeting future demand for food, water, and energy. And today we'll look at some of the future impacts of climate change, that's projected impacts, on the availability of water for agriculture, and why that suggests that we must take a collaborative approach into the future, that we cannot deal with this in silos. And Tasmania, incidentally, is better equipped than a lot of other places because of a project that was done here called the Climate Futures of Tasmania project, which was a downscaling of global, it's not really, not a typical downscaling project, but it's a process downscaling, which refers to running global models separately on a 10 by 10 kilometer grid. And as a result, we have very high resolution data of climate projections for the state of Tasmania. So this is very broadly what's projected into the future. Two big changes to expect is I must admit, the slide sequence has changed, the weakening of the westerlies that play a significant role on climate here, which means there's reduced rainfall towards the west, and also increasing surface sea temperatures on the east side, which leads to a greater occurrence of cut-off lows and more rainfall on the eastern side of the state. That is the projected climate. And if you were to look at that, you'd say it's not so dramatic, the changes that we can expect in the state. We could be forgiven for thinking that when we look at it at the state scale, but the devil's in the detail. So when you look at it seasonally, you can see how it changes across the seasons. In the summer, you can expect almost an 18% reduction in rainfall. And in winter, it changes. Similarly, towards the east, in autumn and spring, which are very important seasons from an agricultural point of view. So this could change how we crop, what we do with water, and how we manage water. Again, overlay that with changes in temperature, evaporation, and then you have a different impact in terms of runoff across the state. And this is the percentage change again across the seasons. And of course, changes in river flows. This is the observed reduction already that has happened in the state. So the key message here is, in Tasmania, the averages do not mean so much. It is the detail, it's the variability across our little state that matters a lot here. This is a case of one catchment, the Ringarooma catchment. And this is data published by the Bureau. And you can see how these events are intensifying. So there's more peaks and greater troughs. So this is very significant for farmers and irrigators who need to plan what they're using this water for. Okay, now to switch track and coming back to the present, this is the state government's ambitious aspirational goal of increasing agricultural value. This is at the farm gate, tenfold by 2050. And this is commonly, it's the AgriVision strategy that's quite common across, commonly cited in a lot of government documents and strategies. Now, is this possible in this future that we foresee? A study done at the university, which is a modeling study to say, is such a tenfold increase possible? They found that, yes, it is in fact possible, assuming that we can switch to high-value crops. And they make a case that Tasmania is better suited, given our distance from the mainland and the cost structures that we have to work with, that it is in fact possible only if we switch to high-value crops. And interestingly, the study also pointed out that the limiting factor is not actually water, but land that's available, that's possible to be used in a sustainable manner for agriculture. So that might be the limiting factor rather than water in this case. That is just what this study modeled into the future. There's some upsides to climate as well. As power sources change and other renewable sources of power become equally viable, if solar and wind, then would hydro have to rethink about the value of water that's held in storages and what is the value of that water? Is it better used for irrigation? These are all questions that will come up into the future. There's, of course, things you would have heard already from an agricultural point of view. Climate change is not such a bad thing for some, in some contexts. So pasture growth is predicted to actually increase and plateau off after a certain point. So it's always mixed messages. It's not one clear future for us. Now, what does this mean at the farm scale? So this, you can look at different motivations or different aims that we have at different scales. At the paddock scale, you're mainly concerned with yield, to get the best yield out of your paddock. When you switch to the farm scale, different products, different enterprises, you're looking at profitability overall for your farm. When you switch to the catchment, then you have to think of the externalities, that what you do on your farm, the externalities on others. And so you have to deal with sustainability. And when you go to the state level, it's market access, and we are reliant on things that infrastructure at the state level. It's a very simplistic view of the case. And of course, all these scales interact. And these are some of the projects that TIA, that's the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture, is undertaking in each of these spaces. And today I'll just briefly talk about two of the programs. That's the Water for Profit, one which was recently completed, and WaterNet, which is a proposal for a project that we hope to undertake. Okay. Water for Profit was mainly focused on at the farm scale. So it was a project undertaken by TIA, TFGA, Macquarie Franklin, and the government, and a group of farmers who signed up to that initiative. The fundamental part of that project was peer-to-peer learning, because there's a lot of irrigation schemes being rolled out in the state. It's quite new. Some people have been irrigating before, but not everyone. So it's new technology, new practices, new enterprises. So this was a mechanism for farmers and consultants and researchers to get together and share. So we'd hold these events on different farms and have field days and share that knowledge with each other, apart from other modeling and other work that was done as well. But that was the core. So 58 farm businesses participated, and most of them said they benefited a lot from these peer-to-peer learning. But most of it was focused on getting the most out of the water, getting the most out of that investment that they made in water. And a lot of it is to do with technology, of course, and how to use this new technology and make the most of it. And we do say it's designed by farmers for farmers because they were involved in the design of the program and continually involved in how it was delivered. Now, the other project, which is an idea based on a pilot that we undertook. The pilot project, it was focused on that middle scale, which is the very difficult scale, actually. At the larger scales, the law of larger numbers operates, and you can have statistics, and even the Bureau is able to give us some predictions, and you can rely on that because larger numbers tend to give different understanding. At the smaller scale, things are much more controllable. But at that middle scale, it's quite a challenging space to work in, and that is where you really feel the need to collaborate at that meso scale. And this project was basically run by the university. They had a SenseT program, so it involved setting up sensors across one catchment in the state, different points in the catchment, and collecting additional data than what was actually available, so real-time data on stream flow and water quality, and sharing that data with the water users in that catchment through a portal. And studying what that sharing of data actually did. Like, did it help farmers manage their water better, or what did it actually lead to? Interestingly, the portal was not used very much. I think one person logged on and checked it and couldn't be bothered. But that one person who would log on would actually SMS all the other farmers. And the SMS turned out to be the more useful part of the project, a big learning for us, so not to design these big, fancy websites there. But what that SMS did, what the farmers actually were doing was monitoring the flow in the river. They had more access to real-time data. And in Tasmania, the way we manage environmental sustainability is through rules that protect minimum flows in rivers. So it functions as cease-to-take rules. So when the flow in the river drops below a certain threshold, farmers are informed to stop pumping water from the river. So seeing that data beforehand, that, okay, there's a cease-to-take going to occur. Usually, typically, when they can foresee that, everyone tries to take out as much as they can before. And often that's a very bad outcome for everyone as well as for the river. And the cease-to-take comes forward. This way, they were able to roster themselves to say, okay, today I will take, during this off-peak time, I will take, and they basically collaborated using SMS, and they managed to avoid the cease-to-take in the river. Okay, so it's basically a coordinated extraction to avoid the cease to take, and it was during a particularly dry season that this occurred. And afterwards, we had a consulting company go and do a study where they opened their books to this company and looked at the opportunity cost and what they would have lost if they had not had access to that water, if that cease to take had actually occurred. And that was the estimated savings, just through collaboration, actually. While the sensors and the data enabled it, it was ultimately a human social willingness to engage with each other that actually got that economic benefit for them. Now, the next stage of this project is, the questions we're asking is, was this just a one-off thing that happened in that one catchment? Is it really transferable? Is it scalable? Would other water users, like town water supply, would forestry water users, often there's some animosity. Rivers actually could almost be called as rivers of mistrust. As you come from upstream to downstream, there's not a lot of trust. So can technology enable more trust to be generated across different water users? So these are questions that we're asking. And most of you may have heard of Elinor Ostrom's work, which is basically a rejection of the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons states that if we all had access to a resource, to a common resource, it'll be depleted very quickly because private interest overrules public good. But Ostrom's work in 80 different case studies with her students proved that through collaborative processes, the tragedy of commons can be avoided. But these are the conditions that Ostrom and her students said are required for collaboration to work. The first few are largely determined by geography, and we cannot control so much. But many of the others are our constructions, very human institutional things. Could we change that? And those are the questions that we have. So they're social and institutional. And ultimately, even to do this kind of work, UTAS and TIA can't do it alone, of course. So these are the people that we are collaborating with to see how can we use data and technology we heard perhaps robotics as well now that we have to contend with. How do we use that the way I see it is not to substitute for human potential or human work, but how do we enhance how we do our work? How does it enable us to interact with others better, to achieve an outcome that's good for all, if such a thing is ever possible? We're also engaging, interestingly, with the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, who were here in Tasmania to explore how we could work together into the future. And water management came up as a very big common area to engage with. So this is something that might come up into the future. And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepa. I find that amazing, that situation in Ringarooma where the one farmer just decided to help out everyone. Any questions for Deepa? I have a question about that and about how likely is that situation would arise elsewhere. Like that's kind of a small community. Is that it's a list of factors as to why things work.
Yes, totally. And that question is the uppermost in our minds. Was that just a one-off because that was already a close-knit group? Yeah. It was a water user group that was used to working together. They had that trust already there, that they trusted that one person who took that charge and did that roster. But increasingly share farming, share they share everything these days. And other water user groups are also starting to realize that in times of dry times particularly, I mean, it's quite common sense that if we roster our use, can we do it? But bigger concerns are energy because of off-peak tariffs. So then how do you schedule who gets to do that? And another question is really, how did this change the ecological impacts on the river? That's still they met the cease-to-take levels, but did it really alter the condition of the river? So that's still not
Part of the story.
part of the, yeah. Thank you.
Question in the middle.
Is there any concern that the soil structures we're rolling down,
I've turned on. Flick it up.
are we rolling out irrigation beyond the science to say that it can be done safely with gaining water, various sources? What about soil structures and the land that's been there for millennia? Is it able to cope with that new water source and more intense irrigation practices?
That's a very good question, I would say, because it's a difficult question, but from what I can see, the Tasmanian irrigation schemes now have learnt from other mistakes done elsewhere. So they start off with farm water access plans that have to be made before you can just decide to roll out irrigation. So there are some mechanisms in place, but I would also argue that a lot of this actually happens learning by doing. So people are taking up irrigation not merely just to get greater economic returns. Some of them are doing it as a long-term investment, that it actually leads to higher land value, or it sets it up better for their children. So not everyone is doing it purely for the economic reasons. So they take it up, and then they're working out how is it going to work on my land. And soils is a key part because of the variability that we see in climate in Tasmania that directly translates to variability in everything on the land as well. So that's a learning, and drainage as well is becoming a key issue into the future. So yeah, I cannot say confidently that yes, we're there, but there have been some good steps along the way to set us up to deal with it possibly better. And the schemes are also quite small and much smaller scale, so we don't have monsters to deal with, like in the Murray-Darling, for example. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One more question. Up.
David Munson, UTAS. Has there been any attempt at genuine user pays as a better means of rationing high value?
Genuine user pays in terms of pricing of water. Actually, I'm not very qualified to answer that. I don't know if anyone else. I know there's the investment in the schemes is state government, Commonwealth, as well as private investment into the scheme itself, and the economic viability was key in the design of these schemes. But of course, there was public investment in there. So I don't know if someone else.
There's a lot of resistance, that's all. But, it's probably not enough.
Yeah, so if somebody else in the audience wants to answer that, I don't know. Yep, that we'll leave that as a question then. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Deepa.